Hey guys! Thank you to all my supporters for coming back and supporting the channel, and if you're new here, welcome. This video is a continuation of our second grade book list. It's about history. There will be history books, books about inventors, one book about geography, and unfortunately no poem books because I didn't find one that I enjoyed enough to share in this video, but I will try to include that in future videos. So we are talking about the 13 colonies, talking a little bit more about Jon Smith, the Pilgrims, and Pocahontas. So the first book is Roanoke, the Lost Colony, an Unsolved Mystery from History by Jane Yoland and Heidi Elizabeth Yoland Stemple. And we will be going through the 13 colonies in a chronological order. I won't be talking about all the 13 colonies. We're just hitting some of the more popular colonies, and Roanoke is one of them. So Roanoke was the first colony, and this is the inside of the book, and it talks about this little girl whose father is a investigator, and she talks about how she's going to put clues together to solve the mystery of the Roanoke colony. So it was one of the first the first colony, but it was not the first established colony, because if you know the history of Roanoke, the people disappeared, and historians aren't sure what happened to the Roanoke people, and so this is what the book is about. It gives you clues along the way as you're reading so that you can kind of form a hypothesis as to what happened to the people of Roanoke. It was a good book. My daughter enjoyed it. I like the illustrations, and yeah, it was good. The next colony that we're going to talk about is Jamestown and the founding of Jamestown. And Jamestown is the official first colony of the Americas. It is the one that thrived after lots of hardship. And we talked about Pocahontas in the first month of school, and this will continue on a little bit more about Pocahontas and Jon Smith. This book is called The True Story of Pocahontas, and when you have a title like A True Story, I feel like the bar is set really high, so the information inside needs to be good. I think this book was a good book. It definitely has good factual information. My daughter enjoyed the book. Let me flip through it here, some of the pages. It is a step into reading level 3 reader. This is something that a second grader could read, but I read this to my daughter. This may be more towards, the middle or end of second grade, that a second grader would be reading this unless they're advanced. And yeah, I thought it was good. I didn't think it was great. I sort of feel like some of the information kind of portrayed Pocahontas as, well, towards the end of the story when she goes to England, sort of like she never wanted to return back to the Americas, which from other accounts that I've read, that is not true. She did want to come back to the Americas with her son and with her husband, but overall this was a good book, and my daughter enjoyed it. Speaking of Jamestown, it was difficult to find a book about Jamestown and people living in Jamestown. For me, it's important to talk about Jamestown because our family has a direct connection to Jamestown. So I want my daughter to know about Jamestown, and we're going to do a little bit of family history when we're talking about Jamestown. This book, Who's Saying What in Jamestown? Thomas Savage. This is a story about a young boy named Thomas Savage who comes over to the Americas, and he goes to live with the Powhatan Indians, and he meets Pocahontas, becomes friends with Pocahontas. But he's not the only boy who lived with the English boy who lived with the Powhatan Indians. There were 3 other boys who also lived amongst the Powhatan, learned the language, learned the customs and the cultures. but Thomas Savage is more well known because there's a little bit more written about him. This book is historical fiction. The author even says a lot of it is fiction because there's not much information about Thomas Savage. I didn't think that this was an appropriate book for second grader, just because there's quite a bit of gruesome violence in it. However, if your children are older, maybe you would want to read this to them. I would look through it first, but I thought that this was interesting. I did not know that there were boys like Thomas Savage who were living with the Powhatans and learning the Powhatan language for Jamestown people. And so I wanted to mention this, bring this up to my daughter. The next few books are about the Plymouth colony, of course, Plymouth, Massachusetts, and the Pilgrims. Everybody learns about this, a very important part of American history. And so this book is Step Into Reading. Again, it's a level 3, talks about the first Thanksgiving. I read this to my daughter. A very good overview of the Pilgrims and what happens during the first Thanksgiving. So if you need a reader, perhaps again your child could read this more than likely towards the middle or end of the year, but you could always go ahead and read this to your child. The next book is The First Thanksgiving by Jean Craighead George. A good book, again, about the Pilgrims, talks about, what they go through in Europe and how they travel over the seas and that people passed away from disease and hardship. And that living the first year in Plymouth was not easy, and talks a little bit about the Pilgrim lifestyle and when they meet Squanto and how Squanto helps the Pilgrims. And then at the end it does talk about the first Thanksgiving and the feast that they have. Squanto's Journey, the story of the first Thanksgiving. This I thought was an excellent book. It talks about Squanto and it talks about his friend who meet the Pilgrims and help the Pilgrims in Plymouth the first year that they arrive. It starts off with how Squanto lived his life in the Americas, and it talks about how he was captured and taken to Europe and put into slavery, and how he escapes from slavery, and he meets some friars who help him learn English, and then he travels back to the Americas to see his tribe and his family, only to find out that everyone in his family had died, and most of his tribe had also died from different causes, disease and fighting. And I just think it's a great story. It's told from his point of view, but I thought it was an amazing story of this man's resilience to go through what he went through, so many things that he went through. And when the Pilgrims arrive in Plymouth, he still has the character to help them, to show them how to grow food, to show them how to hunt so that they could survive. And I think that's just an amazing story to tell. If You Sailed on the Mayflower in 1620 by Anne McGovern, it is all about the Pilgrims and their voyage on the Mayflower, who they were, what their life was like before they got on to the Mayflower, what their life was like on the Mayflower, and what happened when they landed. And it talks all about who they were, what they believed, and how they ate and slept, and what kind of work they did, and if they went to school, and just talks about everything that you may want to know and what you're curious about when it comes to Pilgrims, and it's written in a very easy to understand fashion. Now, the next two books I wanted to mention because I totally forgot to mention them in my video about Native Americans and early explorers. This is called Children of the Earth and Sky and Children of the Wind and Water, 5 stories about Native American children. In each book, it is by Stephen Krensky. 2 good books. We've already read these. Just wanted to mention those because I thought they were good and I forgot them. I left them out of the last video. But speaking of Stephen Krensky, the next book is called Witch Hunt. It happened in Salem Village. So this book is about the Salem colony and what happened in Salem Village. It is a step 4 book for grades 2 to 4. It is an older edition. You could find it at your library. My library had it, but for whatever reason, I was having a difficult time getting a hold of it. I flipped through some sample book online, and you can find books through, I believe it's called the Internet Archive. I'll have to talk about it on a short, but by previewing it on Internet Archive, I was able to then go ahead and purchase a copy. And so this book is also by Stephen Krensky, and I thought it was a very well done book. I think he did a great job writing it. And it is not gory, there's not a lot of violence. However, I will say that they do talk about people who were found guilty and accused of being a witch and how they were punished, which was by hanging. So they do mention that in the book. Just a forewarning so that you know that. But Salem Village, very interesting. I remember learning about this when I was a kid, and I think there's a lot of good lessons to be learned about talking about Salem. And so I'll just flip through the book as I'm talking so you can see the picture. So if you do not know the history of Salem, there is Salem Village and Salem Township. And this is about Salem Village, where the witch hunts happen. So a new person takes over Salem Village, and Salem Village was mostly made up of rural people and workers. The Salem Township was more for the elite class, people of higher status. And so if you know the story of Salem, some girls start getting sick. They get seen by a doctor. The doctor doesn't know what's wrong with them, and he says they must be bewitched. And so then this starts fear and panic in Salem Village amongst the people, because the people were Puritans. They were very religious and very superstitious. And in Europe, the panic and fear over being bewitched and witches, it started in Europe, and then it carried over to the Americas. And so I'm not 100% sure, but I believe this is where in Salem this fear started. And so these girls, they started accusing people in the town of bewitching them, and they go in front of a court, and the court listens to them, and then people start getting accused of being a witch. And I think this is a great book to teach the lessons of lying and what happens when people lie, that it can be very destructive. Also, I think teaches a lesson about greed and also control and also coercion, or the way that people can be persuaded in a forceful way to say, do, or think, or behave in a way that they normally would not if it wasn't for the fact that they were being forced to do so. And so anyway, so the story continues on talking about the girls, and eventually 200 some people in the village are put in jail because everybody's pointing fingers left and right and accusing each other, neighbor accusing neighbor. and 20 people end up being hanged. Most of them were women, and a few of them were men. And unfortunately, there were also children who were punished. No children were hung, but they were placed into jail. And in fact, one of the girls who accused people, she came out and said, we're all lying about it, actually. And she was jailed. And so when people started speaking up and saying, hey, this isn't right, there's no way that this many people could be witches, and people that spoke up against it, they were also punished. And so I think the end of this story is very powerful. I'll read you the last sentence. It says, "The Salem witch hunt was a time when fear and hate ruled over common sense." So, pretty good book. The next book goes into geography. It's called Scrambled States of America. This is a fun book. It helps your kids learn about geography, and it's about the state of Kansas not being happy where it's located, and it wants to switch places with the other states. Tells the other states think it's a great idea, and so then they all switch places and everything gets scrambled up, and then the states realize, I liked where I was, and then they all go back together the way they should at the end, and it's a lot of fun. The next book is a book about inventors. I try to read my daughter books about inventors, an American inventor each month, and this is the one that I've chosen for this book list. It's called The Crayon Man. And it is about a man named Edwin Binney, and it talks about how he absolutely loved color, but the place where he worked, everything was black and gray and coal colored. And so he wanted to invent better writing pencils, and he ended up doing that. And they took off. Everybody loved his writing pencils and his chalk that he made. And his wife told him, I think you should create colored pencils. I think that'd be great for kids. And the ones from France are so beautiful. But they're very expensive. And so he thought about it, and he started practicing and experimenting and mixing things together to see how he could create colored pencils. And eventually the people that help him, he does figure out how to make colored pencils of all different shades, and he calls them Crayola. And he names them Crayola after his wife helps him name them. Cray or Cray, I don't know how you pronounce it. I told you I don't speak French, but this comes from the French word for pencil and ola for oil, so something like oil or waxy pencil. And so that is how Crayola crayons came to be, and we love Crayola crayons and we love color. I mentioned a lot that my daughter loves art, and this was an excellent story. The next book is also a very good book. This man did not invent pottery, but this book is called Dave the Potter, Artist, Poet, and Slave. And so even though he didn't invent pottery, I put him in the inventor's books because he did have a unique slant to his pottery. He had a unique take to his pottery, which is why he's remembered. And so this book is about a man who was enslaved, and he becomes a potter. They teach him how to make pottery, and he becomes very good at making pottery. And his name is Dave. And if you don't know about slavery, many slaves did not have a name, or they only had a first name. And this man had a first name only, and his name was Dave. And so historians know about his pottery because he signed his name, Dave, on each pot. And that's also very unique because a lot of slaves did not know how to read and write. And so they could find his pottery with his name, Dave, inscribed on it. Now these pots would go to, wealthy families. But it was so interesting. And then something else that makes his pottery unique is that as he progresses and becomes better and better at pottery making, he also starts to inscribe phrases on his pottery. He then puts poems on his pottery, and they're not sure if he made up the poems himself or if somehow he was transcribing them from something else. But very fascinating. From what I understand from this book, this isn't something that historians see commonly, and so this is why Dave is such an important part of history. And yeah, I just thought it was an excellent book. The next book is called Light in the Darkness. I wanted to mention this. It is a story about how slaves learned to read. It is by Lisa Klein Ransom and illustrated by James E. Ransom. And this was a very good book. It is a book about how slaves learn to read and the importance of reading. And the reason that I bring this book up, and also the book about Dave the Potter, is because slavery started in Jamestown, so the first colony. And so this book is not set in Jamestown. Also, the book about Dave the Potter is not set in Jamestown, but I thought they were two good books to mention. And so this book goes through, shows how a mother wants to teach her child how to read, and they go in the middle of the night when everyone's asleep, and they have class underground actually, and they learn how to read. But it also talks about the danger of reading and what would happen if a slave was caught reading. Now, this is not graphic, there's not a lot of violence, but it does mention how slaves were treated if they were caught reading or learning. And so again, precaution if your child is sensitive to things like that. But they just mention it one time here. And so anyway, so there's a man who's teaching them how to read with sticks or writing in sand, and they learn how to read. And he learned how to read from someone else. And it's just a powerful story. I thought it was very good. And then two more books that I felt were worth mentioning. This is a reader if you're looking for readers. This is called Little Hawk's New Name. It's for grades 2 and 3. This is by Scholastic. It is an older book. The author is Don Bolognese. I believe that's how you pronounce it. My daughter said she liked this book, so I figured I would throw this in at the end. But it's about a boy named Little Hawk. He gets a horse, learns how to ride the horse, and then it talks about how his tribe hunts buffalo. So this is set in with the Plains Indians. And then towards the end, they have some trouble at the trading post. His grandfather gets captured, and then Little Hawk has to save his grandfather. So I feel like it's a pretty good book. Can keep your kids' attention if you need something for them to read or you want to read it to them. And then lastly, as a resource, I want to talk about D.K. Smithsonian American History, a visual encyclopedia. I just wanted to mention that this is a good reference book. It really has a very, very small text about a lot of different things. So if you want to go more in-depth with things, you're going to have to check out other books. But this really talks about a lot of different things that happen in small snippets. So I want to leave you with The Crayon Man because that was our favorite book. And I also just wanted to say that next time, in the next video, we will be talking about early pioneers. Hopefully, as long as we get through all these books, we'll be talking about early pioneers. So we'll be talking about Lewis and Clark, Sacagawea, Daniel Boone, and maybe the Declaration of Independence, maybe if we can get to that, and also Davy Crockett. As well, we'll have some more books about American inventors, and I'll try to add in a poetry book if I can find one. I hope you enjoyed this book list, and I hope that you can incorporate some of these books into your learning, and I will see you in the next video.